Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking about Chapter 3 in our Interpersonal Communications textbook, Looking Out, Looking In, and this chapter is called What You See is What You Get. And it's all about perception and the way that we perceive other people, and the way that we perceive ourselves, and how that affects communication between us. So one of the things the chapter talks about is how we categorize other people. Whether we realize it or not, we categorize people upon meeting them by age, gender, personality, appearance, all of that. And that's one of the reasons why first impressions are so important, is because we as humans really hold on to that, which I think is really interesting. One of the things I really wanted to talk about in this video was in the chapter it talks about the halo effect and the devil effect, which is basically blindly liking somebody or disliking somebody based on one trait. I know there's always that one person in our lives that somebody has that you just dislike, and when someone asks, why don't you like them? The answer is always, well, they were mean to me this one time, or they belong to this political party, or something like that. And when you're asked to elaborate, there's not really any more information you can give. And you're not really sure why, but you just strongly dislike a person for that one reason. And that is part of the devil effect, which is basically you just hate someone for one reason. Which I think is really interesting, because I think a lot of us do it without really realizing that's what we're doing. And the same goes for the halo effect. You might think somebody is a really great person just because they are really pretty, and then it turns out that they're actually a really mean person that you're idolizing because of their one positive trait that you see in them. So I thought that was really fascinating. The chapter really went into details about how it is that we see other people, but it also talked about how we see ourselves and how we're much more likely to think positive things about ourselves is where we think more negatively about other people. For instance, if something bad happens to, a coworker, you'd think it's because, it's their personality, or it's because they didn't do a good job, or something along those lines. Is where if something happens to us, we are usually going to think, wow, this, happened because of, something that's completely out of my control. It wasn't my fault at all. And that's just how we tend to think about ourselves. We think about ourselves as being special, as being different from everybody else, which is, really interesting, the way that we perceive ourselves differently than we perceive other people, and we tend to cut ourselves more slack than we would somebody else, because we know our situation best. And talking about different people's situations brings me to empathy, which we talk about in the chapter, which is really interesting because empathy is basically being able to relate to somebody else on a personal level, being able to recreate that situation and sort of know how they're feeling, even though it's likely impossible to know exactly how somebody is feeling, even if you've been through similar experiences. Empathy is really important because it lets that person know that you have a genuine understanding of whatever it is they're feeling, whatever it is they're going through. And I think that empathy can be much more important than sympathy, because you're really showing that person that you are connecting with them and whatever's going on in their life, which I thought was really interesting as well. One of the things the chapter talked about that I thought was also fascinating was about our psychological challenges that make us different in the way we perceive things. One of the things it talked about was ADHD. And as being somebody who has had attention problems, it's very interesting to see how it mentions things like somebody that may have attention deficit may find a long lecture very boring, and somebody else across the room could have found the lecture very fascinating. And it's basically because the person with attention deficit and the person without it, brains work differently, as where the one person who has attention deficit is having problems concentrating and it's making the lecture feel more boring, as where the other person maybe is able to concentrate on the lecture more, and it's making it more interesting, and they're able to retain that information and feel good about that, which I thought was interesting. That also talked about bipolar disorder, which basically is the extreme changing of moods. It happens usually over the course of a couple of weeks. It's not an instantaneous thing, but it affects how these people have social interactions, because if they're in a manic state, they're going to react and act with others differently than if they were in a depressive state, or if they were more neutral feeling, which is interesting because we don't really think about how other people might be feeling. So that's pretty much what the chapter 3 is all about. All about perception, how we see ourselves, how we see each other, how it affects our level of communication. Have a great night, everyone.